Kofi.
Lord Hannay, Secretary-General, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great delight to be here on this 60th anniversary of the United Nations and in support of the United Nations Association. It was an organisation I was sort of brought up with, and the very first time I ever came to this hall was to speak and take part in proceedings of a conference of the junior branch of, or then junior branch of the UNA, the Council for Education in World Citizenship. I'd like, David, if I may, to congratulate you on your appointment as chair of the UNA. Your dedication and commitment to the United Nations goes before you, and as everybody who knows you, so too does your vigour and energy and professionalism that you'll bring to this post. And in particular, I welcome everybody here, but I'm delighted that the UNA has been able to organise this event to coincide with a visit to London by Kofi Annan, and we'll look forward very much to his address. I see through the gloom that we're joined by many distinguished supporters of the United Nations, including Lord Howe, Geoffrey Howe, one of my predecessors as Foreign Secretary. As David said, tonight we're marking the 60th anniversary of the first plenary session of the United Nations General Assembly. Although that first gathering, which the newspapers of the time affectionately referred to as the first town meeting of the world, actually took place a little earlier in the month, the 10th of January, to be precise. And as we also know, there's at least one person here tonight who remembers that date all too well, and it's remarkable having the privilege of talking to Archie Mackenzie because it's as though this memory was so fresh. It had happened only a couple of weeks ago. When that first General Assembly gathered here in the Methodist Hall, it was, I understand, rather to the annoyance of the Methodist congregation who were forced to decamp to the London Coliseum, and some of whose members expressed deep disquiet at the idea of gin-swilling diplomats being allowed on the premises. And I fully understand that, having come from a similar background myself. Indeed, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that this would be the venue. Many of the officials in the Preparatory Commission advocated holding the meeting on the other side of Parliament Square in the great medieval chamber of Westminster Hall. In the end, this building won out for the rather prosaic reasons of heating and acoustics. Nothing changes. It was, though, rather an apt venue for the United Nations, an organisation committed to freedom, peace and equality. The suffragettes met here in 1914. Mahatma Gandhi, on that extraordinary visit which he made to the UK in 1931, spoke here. It was in this building in 1940 that General de Gaulle announced the foundation of the Free French movement. And throughout the war, the basement served as one of the biggest air raid shelters in London, providing safety for hundreds of people. The minutes of that first meeting of the UN are also fascinating. They reverberate with a real sense of the optimism and idealism of the time. And much of what was said still resonates today. The then Prime Minister Clement Attlee spoke eloquently of how the welfare of each nation was bound up with the welfare of the world as a whole. How, in his words, we are truly all members one of another. And if that was true in 1946, it was even more, and is even more true today. There was also at that meeting some early examples of the pitfalls of which can befall any of us who appear at the United Nations at a party conference in front of microphones. The then British Foreign Secretary Ernie Bevin didn't realise that his microphone was on, and at the Security Council, the entire Security Council heard him mutter, "The bloody chairman has double-crossed me again." Never happens these days. There is one thing which stands out from the minutes of those early meetings, reflected in what David said. Many of the people in this room today were veterans of the League of Nations, aware of the tragic consequences of that organisation's failings. They were absolutely determined that the United Nations would be new and different, and that it should not and had not to repeat the mistakes of the past. So the recognition of the need to change and adapt in the face of each new challenge has always been vital to the success of the UN. And no one has shown more commitment to that task than tonight's guest of honour, Kofi Annan. As Secretary-General, Kofi has not been afraid to engender debate or questions which are as sensitive as they are important. For example, he's forcefully challenged the idea that states can hide behind their sovereignty to defend human rights abuses. He's used his voice to urge the international community to agree upon its collective responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from the worst of atrocities, from genocide, from war crimes, from crimes against humanity. Similarly, Kofi has worked to cut through the ambiguity and equivocation which has surrounded the definition of terrorism. And in the fractious aftermath of the war in Iraq, it was Kofi who spoke of a fork in the road and who then helped profoundly to heal the organization's divisions. Kofi's long career in the United Nations, at the World Health Organization, UNHCR in Geneva, at the Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa, in the Secretariat in New York, and on various special assignments, equipped him to drive reform of the UN machinery itself. His important reports in 1997 and again in 2002 on UN reform showed how the organization could be made much more efficient. And making good the charters, We the Peoples, under his stewardship, the UN is more open than ever, with wider access for civil society and more participation by the private sector through initiatives such as the Global Compact. Last year, Kofi's report, In Larger Freedom, set out a vision for the United Nations better able to bring development, security, and human rights for all. And I know that no one, not least of all Kofi, underestimates the scale of the challenges ahead both for the UN and for its member states. Take a quick glance at the headlines on any given day in the past week. Worries over climate change, uncertainty in the Palestinian Authority, concern over Iran's nuclear ambitions, the complex dispute in Cyprus. If we are to meet these challenges, and many others besides, the international community will need a strong United Nations.